Why do we hate communism? I come from a formerly communist country. It has royally fucked up our economy. Most countries weren't allowed to develop their industry in multiple directions, and so we have one stretch of land with factories and the rest is an agricultural country. No middle way in anything for the communists. Both parts of the country struggle. People grew up being used to bribe their way into and out of anything. You want a place at a university? Bribe your way in. You want a good job when you graduate? Bribe your way in. You need a legal problem solved? Bribe your way out. You want that skilled nurse to give you the injection? Pay her privately. You want a better doctor? Pay him privately. You want that piece of furniture for which there's a waiting list? Bribe your way in and out. You want those clothes for your child? Bribe. My country's language was actively suppressed, ridiculed as being an animal language, and use of Russian was actively promoted everywhere. To the point that my generation grew up bilingual by default. My people grew up with the mentality that you have to sacrifice yourself for others, always. Doesn't matter that you're killing yourself this way. Doesn't matter that you can take better care of others when you are good. This majorly fucked up generations of people. We're full of inferiority complexes, victim complexes, and full of pride. We work hard, but mostly for others' benefit. Under capitalism, man exploits man. Under communism, it's just the opposite. John Kenneth Galbraith. The people in communist countries didn't like it. Why should anyone else? America doesn't seem to know the difference between communism and socialism, though, so don't get the two confused. Because in almost every communist country there has been mass deaths, starvation, and purges. In theory it sounds great, but it always turns into a dictatorship. I think we have to mention that Hollywood made a lot of anti-Soviet communist movies during the Cold War. It definitely plays into the ingrained hatred of socialism, communism in today's America. Not defending or attacking any ideological system. Just pointing out something that I didn't see anyone mention. There's nothing wrong with the ideal of communism, but when you try to forcibly create it within authoritarian state, it's basically doomed to fail in a way that creates a lot of suffering. Human nature precludes communism from working. The basis for capitalist economics is an understanding that humans are greedy creatures with unlimited wants in a world of limited resources. Capitalism harnesses that greed in a way that has propelled the world forward economically and technologically. Communism makes the assumption that people are willing to put aside their own desires to help other people they don't even know. This is hopelessly naive, with no possibility for personal enrichment. Innovation is stifled. Markets don't function normally under communism either, and price signals don't have the same impact, leading to gluts and shortages. There's a reason why all attempts to create communist countries have failed, and why formerly communist countries that have embraced capitalism have seen marked improvements in the quality of the average citizen's life. I'm old enough to have grown up with the Berlin Wall in place. People my age know how bad communism is as we saw it in action. It's unfortunately more common for young people today to embrace communism as they don't have the visceral life experience of seeing how awful it is. It's never been successful. BC power attracts certain PPL, and rarely good ones. Even governments with limits to their power attract a few who want to do good. Some who are elitist and want a social status. Some who want to force everyone to do it their way. And some who are basically horrible excuses for human beings and want it for the sake of the power. Or some combination of them. A government with absolute power is basically the only way to achieve power in its country. So all of the horrible PPL in that area will be attracted to it. They've nowhere else to feed their need. Because it looks good on paper, but never works. Have you ever been part of a large group project? There's always at least one person who doesn't contribute. How many coworkers do you know who don't pull their weight? The ignorance in these comments is disappointing. Like anything else, there are a bunch of reasons, and this thread has identified a lot of them. 1. The Cold War came out of the ashes of World War II and a tense alliance between US and USSR. Basically, the USSR was very pro-communist and the US was pro-capitalism. This also meant the two nations were anti the other one. 2. In large part because of this divide, the USSR and the US indirectly fought each other for decades by funding opposing nations. Now the USSR and the US never fought directly, but Korea and Vietnam, and literally dozens more, were propelled by the two sides. Agreeing with any communist idea was un-American, because we were literally fighting wars to put in either a communist or a capitalist government all over the world. 3. Government works best when its theoretical ideas become a reality. Capitalism has many significant faults, but the question was in regards to communism. So let's focus there. The very basic idea is everyone does work to better the community. But in reality it's difficult to punish someone that doesn't provide. And in the same sense everybody receives basically the same reward for contributing, so there's very little benefit to being an air traffic controller versus being a surf instructor. American Being America highlights these flaws and says how bad and lazy communists are. This is why we punish lazy people with bad jobs or unemployment and reward people with high wages for important jobs. 4. This led to a strong anti-communism sentiment in America because all communist ideas were bad. This also breeds the "just work harder for more reward" sentiment and the anti-handout ideas. Don't bring those commie ideas over here. Hey, I don't like the way you think. I'm going to call you a commie. 5. So in reality our means of government is a blend of numerous ideologies and isn't strictly capitalistic. The communist governments were similar, but often not formally diverse. So what's one way to diversify a communist government? Add a bit of capitalism. This was done early and often. But since that wasn't legal or formal, it was actually creating a black market for bribery. So if you had something of value, job, equipment, whatever, you could bribe to trade favors or get money, which pretty much leaves a bunch of people out of the loop, which encourages a lot of corruption because there's no way to stop what's going on. And it becomes a lovely spiral where the people in power hold all the cards. So now anyone not in power is just left with whatever they are given. Now those in power have no reason to give a fair shake to the rest of the people. And the power imbalance grows. It's important to note this happens relatively quickly in the US, primarily because of the Cold War. After World War II, the US found itself at odds with the USSR, competing to be the major world superpower, fighting proxy wars, and there was a fear of nuclear war between the countries. A lot of messaging went out to Americans about how everything about the USSR, especially that they were communist rather than capitalist, was evil. Communism is an ideology that seeks to abolish capitalism. Communists want to do this by putting workers in control of the places they work, and thus getting rid of capitalist bosses, putting in place workplace democracy, and abolishing markets, which essentially means that instead of producing things for profit, things are produced for human need. Every person would get what they need and give what they can in terms of labor. There is a lot of disagreement among communist thinkers and activists about what the best way to achieve this society would be. But all agree that capitalism has to die at some point or another. There are a few big branches in this debate. Social Democrats believe that participation in the capitalist, liberal democratic, electoral system can achieve socialism and then communism. Over time, Social Democrats became less radical, advocating instead of socialism for capitalist systems with a welfare state. They tend to be your Bernie Sanders types. Anarchist communists believe that the abolition of capitalism should come with a revolution that should also end the state and all other hierarchy. They believe that governments are inherently oppressive and that communism, which they believe would be the economic liberation of the working class, cannot be achieved using oppressive political means. Then, there are Marxists-Leninists, who believe that the most educated and politically conscious portions of the working class, the vanguard, should form organizations to lead a revolution. The vanguard, often organized in a political party, would then seize power and control over the government, putting in place a state that protects the interests of the working class. This last branch of communist thought has historically been the most successful in measures of popularity and implementation. The Soviet Union, China and the Eastern Bloc were all led by Marxist-Leninist communist parties. These countries are usually known for their suppression of political dissent, economic mismanagement, their violent political systems and their dictatorship. When the Soviet Union became the world's second superpower, Marxism-Leninism essentially becomes synonymous with the word communism in much of the world's eyes. It must be noted that these countries never actually achieved full communism. They used currency. They had markets. Their workplaces were in fact not democratic at all, but they were dictated over by central governments. So because of the violence, poverty and misery that Marxism-Leninism and its own offshoots have caused, and importantly also because of American Cold War propaganda, communism has often been seen by much of the world as terrible. It doesn't work as the people at the top become power-hungry and greedy. LMAO at how most answers here could also apply to capitalist nations, either poorer or wealthier. Human beings in power tend to be dicks, I believe. Have you read Animal Farm by George Orwell? Most the others' comments talk about other countries and their bad experiences with communism. So instead I'll just point you to the McCarthy witch hunts in the US. A part of the reason so many Americans today are hardcore anti-communist comes from the Cold War era, where communist Americans and political parties, there were actually a lot of pro-communist Americans and American political parties before the Cold War, were prosecuted by a series of witch hunts under McCarthy. If you were brought in for trial, you could either deny the crime of being a communist spy, or report others who were also communist and be released. OFC everyone just reported random PPL they didn't like. And the few who were pro-communist Americans weren't spies for Russia. They just had a different take on how a country should be organized. Anyone brought forward had their entire lives destroyed. No one would hire them or associate them. It's no wonder communist political parties dissolve either from a new dislike for communism or fear from prosecution. Ever since the United States political spectrum has been skewed, the entire left side of the political compass has been effectively removed. Today a lot of Americans don't really understand what communism means, its definition, its ideal form, or its abuse by awful regimes. And sadly socialism is constantly confused and accused of being communist. The New Deal, for example, was very socialist and would probably never pass today. As for other countries and communism, well, they are plenty examples of the bad. But if you're genuinely interested in learning more about it, I would highly recommend checking out Vietnam pre- and post the US-Vietnam War. And I personally think that with new technological developments, communism is more viable in AI. Run future. Lol, that's a long way from happening though. Lol, you chose a bad forum to ask this question. Half the comments are just regurgitated American propaganda one-liners. Whether it actually works or not. Whether other companies were actually communist or not. That's a bit irrelevant here. Most Americans hate communism because our teachers and our media told us we should. Why? Because of the Cold War and subsequent culture wars, meant to establish capitalism as the dominant system. The population had to see the opposition, Commie USSR, as fundamentally evil in order to agree to spend so many resources on its defeat. Propaganda.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Haircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.